Before I get started on this lecture, I just want to warn you, you may hear some construction noise or my daughter and her friends playing. I tried to stop both of them. I couldn't, so we're going to keep going. This lecture is about right hemisphere disorders, sometimes abbreviated as RHD. RHD can also be an acronym for right hemisphere damage. So you may see that abbreviation in both contexts. The first bullet point here, I say that communication problems after right hemisphere damage are not as pronounced as they are in aphasia. And what I mean by pronounced here is noticeable. Not that they're any less significant to the patient or their family members, but because the problems show up more at the level of discourse and pragmatics, they aren't noticeable. We generally notice those problems when we have a fair amount of interaction with somebody. And in general, it's been my experience, and people have written about how individuals with right hemisphere damage, their communication difficulties are undertreated. In other words, they're often not referred to us for these kinds of problems. And I think it's simply because physicians aren't hip to these kinds of problems. They don't have their feelers out for them. They don't notice it, etc. We tend to get referrals for individuals after they've had a right hemisphere stroke, more often for cognitive problems, particularly left neglect. So as far as communication goes, again, the big difference between aphasia and right hemisphere disorders is that in aphasia we have damage to the left hemisphere, to those primary processors of the components of language, semantics, phonology, etc. Whereas in right hemisphere damage, we have damage to regions that have more subtle effects on language. We have damage to areas that are, we see more cognitive impairments, and so we have impairments of cognition affecting someone's communication skills, cognitive impairments such as attention. The other difference between right hemisphere damage, communication impairments, and aphasia is that we don't have any classification system for right hemisphere communication disorders like we do for aphasia. We don't have a Broca's, something analogous to a Broca's aphasia after right hemisphere damage, etc. And in fact, the individuals with right hemisphere damage can be quite heterogeneous in terms of their presentation.